If you go to the Mix tab in the Instruments Editing panel, you'll see separate channels for the instrument's available signals. I have one of the snares loaded right now, so as you can see, it has a top mic signal, bottom mic, and the usual room signal. At the top of each channel, you've got a power button. This lets you turn the signal on and off, which unloads and loads the samples from memory too. And then next to that, you've got a drop-down menu to send the signal out different audio outputs. The top signal and bottom signal in this case are both mono, but when it comes to signals like the room signal, which is stereo, you also have this button here to switch it between stereo and mono mode. Then below that, you've got the main volume knob for the signal. And underneath that, you've got mute and solo buttons. And those are useful in case you want to just work on really dialing in one of the signals alone. And then listen to the entire mix. So those are useful for dialing in the mixing for the instrument. And then below that, you've got a pan knob. And with stereo signals, like the room signal, you've got a stereo width knob. And that lets you reduce the stereo width of the signal. And if you go below 0% into the negative numbers, what it does is reverses the left and right channels. And then at the very bottom of each signal, you've got the send amount. And that lets you send the signal directly into the effects bus right here. Each signal has EQ and compression. You can get there by clicking on the effects button in the bottom right corner of the panel. And you can enable the EQ and compression by clicking on this button here or on just the entire title itself. And as you can see, as soon as any effects are enabled, the effects button will light up. That's handy because even when the panel is minimized, you can see that there are effects that are currently active. So the EQ is a 4-band EQ, and you've got gain and frequency for each band. The very lowest band and the highest band can be changed between a shelf mode and a peak mode, and then the two middle bands have a bandwidth control. The compressor is also pretty stereotypical. It has threshold, ratio, attack, release, and a makeup gain control. And then there's also a mix knob. And so essentially it's parallel compression. So what this allows you to do is mix the wet and dry signals together. That way you could really crush the compression, with a super low threshold and a high ratio, but then only mix in a tiny bit of that compressed signal with the dry, uncompressed signal. So that's a pretty useful feature. As you cycle between the instruments, you'll notice that some of them have different signals available. So for example, this trash snare, instead of having a top and bottom signal, we have a natural and vintage signal available. Now, whenever you see these natural and vintage signals, these are both close mics, but they're not really intended to be mixed together. The intention is that you would choose one or the other. The natural signal, of course, for a more natural, modern tone, and then the vintage signal emulating more classic vintage percussion tones. Most of the instruments of the same type have the same mic signals available though. So most of the snares all have the top and bottom signals. And if you make any adjustment to their mixing, you'll notice that when I switch between those instruments, it'll preserve the mixing settings. So that's really useful if you have things mixed a certain way and you want to audition a different instrument without losing those settings.